So 2018 is the centenary of the dancer, choreographer, and director Jerome Robbins. Ballet companies and dance and musical theater aficionados will celebrate and perform his work throughout that year, from the playful ballet Fancy Free to the tragedy as musical West Side Story and the cherished ballet for ballet lovers called Dances at a Gathering. I'm curating an exhibition on Robbins at New York Public Library alongside these activities, a task that feels quite overwhelming at the moment, but one that draws upon my latest book and also on my beginning curatorial lessons with my coach, Radhika Subramanian, with whom I've collaborated on 2 exhibitions here at the New School. So I'm at the very beginning of this conceptualization and eager for ideas and feedback. Some things are known. The topic will be Robbins' relation to New York. The exhibition will run for 4 months. It follows a 4-month exhibition on Bernstein, Leonard Bernstein, also 100 in 2018. And I'm tied to this quote of Robbins. I'm only going to say the bottom part of it. Have you heard the voice of my city, the poor voice, the lost voice, the voice of people selling and swearing, cursing and vulgar, the shrill and the tough, the wail, complaint, the defiance? Have you heard the voice of my city, fighting and hitting and hurt? I've had the pleasure of being part of JIDEST this year, a New School Institute, alongside RIT and others, and we've had this sort of ongoing question about manifesto. So I kind of wrote this initially, some manifestos about my thinking so far. So lots of people don't know Jerome Robbins. That's okay. No need to shame them for that. I get really tired of being on inside conversations that sort of have these sort of like, oh my goodness, everybody needs to know these people, when of course a lot of people don't. Pay tribute, but do not fawn. One of his most famous works is a ballet called Afternoon of a Faun, which is a man and a woman in a dance studio, sort of discovering each other in the mirror and around the mirror, a kind of interesting sort of investigation of narcissism. He named names in front of the House on Un-American Activities Committee. A previous exhibition of his about 10 years ago was faulted for not mentioning that, for not sort of dealing with that particular betrayal, something that he thought was a betrayal and haunted him for the rest of his life. He was kind. One of the sort of most visible acts of that was taking care of former lovers who were dying of AIDS in the early years of that epidemic. He was manipulative and mean, very notoriously. He would call gay men, dancers, faggots in the midst of rehearsals and shame them about who was sleeping with whom. He never met a piece of paper that he didn't write on. It's in a vast, vast archive that is primarily full of 2-dimensional objects. So just learning my curatorial lessons, I realized I'm being told and understanding the limitations of sort of 2-dimensional objects, even though, of course, the primary thing that he did was dance. So there's also a great deal of narcissistic paranoia within all of those pieces of paper, and very difficult to read handwriting. The city was a source of anxiety, alienation, belonging, and inspiration. So sort of the questions that have developed for me are, how do I make someone interested in a person they do not know? How do I make Robbins relevant to today, which was one of the tasks that he did over and over again in many ways. The crucial part of West Side Story was making Romeo and Juliet relevant in the 1950s New York. How do I resist hagiography? One of the answers is to talk about HUAC, perhaps, but I think there are other ways too. And how do I inspire others to remake the city around them? And this I take as my primary point in the exhibition. I wanted to show you just quickly some objects that I'm coming across. There's a kind of, I'm pursuing a thematic rather than a biographical approach, although roughly chronological, sections inspired by different parts of that primary quote. So my city is tall and jagged with gold and slated towers that I'm going to try to feature dances within that theme. There are these masks. One on the right is one that he took of his own face. The ones on his left were part of very little of what's left of a dance called Age of Anxiety. This is Age of Anxiety in terms of the crossings on the stage. And then this is a copy of his rejection from the draft of World War I, in which he is called as having a negative nervous system, constitutional psychopathic inferiority, and inadequate personality. Those were codes for homosexual And he supposedly, anecdotally, said to the question, have you had a homosexual encounter? And he replied, last night. He also had asthma, but I think it actually was these other things that kept him out of World War II. Obviously, there's the making process that can be fully on display. Here's a copy of Age of Anxiety, W.H. Auden's book that was the source of a ballet in 1950, with his marking, watching, observing, fear of action, defiance, plunge, the smile, cough. These are very bad photographs from me in the archives, just taking things for reference. Here are choreographic notes that you see both, this is actually taken by somebody else, noting his work, New York Export Opus Jazz. Other Goldberg variations, noting, again, a kind of spatial design across the stage in various ways. Dance is actually very difficult to notate because there's so many different sort of things to notate, what they're doing in relationship to whom and in the space, connected to the music, connected to whatever sort of set. He also, one of the things that I really want to focus on is his range of creativity and responses. He initially, as a young boy, wrote poems, drew. This continued. He actually did even some composing of music. This is all from his childhood. Here you have the beginning of what would be gazillion number of journals in one way or another. That were already in some ways quite innovative and cross-cutting in terms of what he included. He was a photographer, then eventually a home movie person as well. These are photographs from the 1950s. And the most extraordinary thing is that he did these journals that were accordion fold-out things that started, he did it for about 10 to 12 years in the 1970s, in which he created collages. So here's what they look at. One pulled out. He created, they're from Takashima, the Japanese store, if anybody remembers that, on Fifth Avenue. So he would have these and then sort of notate them in varieties of ways. You can sort of see here both the extensive writing, but also a great amount of just sort of visual interest in current day things, and a lot of attention to what's very clear once you go through these a little bit is that he knows that somebody's going to look at it. They include these kinds of things at the end of it. I don't know if visible here at the bottom is end of side 1, please turn over. Again, an indication that he knew that people would look. So in this terms of placing the viewer in the city and seeing it remade, one of the ways, of course, in which to do that is to see literally the translation of ideas into stages. Here's Fancy Free with drawings of sailors that he was seeing on tour. Here you see in West Side Story photograph, and then stage rendering on the left bottom, and then and then a stage shot. I'm almost done, so good thing. And finally, this is perhaps one of the things that I'm interested in is perhaps creating something about the immersion of the viewer in the city itself, whether that's street scenes that people put themselves in and can take pictures of themselves in many of the ways in which he did as well, and moving kind of having people have a sense of their own sort of city, and ending here on Dance for Life, which was an AIDS benefit that he coordinated with this poster by Robert Rauschenberg on the right.